The iron gate slammed shut in the frost, and a crow burst from the tower, as if it knew what was coming. A man on horseback stops in the middle of the frozen road. A patched cloak, no crest, no real name. But on his right hand, a silver ring still gleams, the one thing he couldn't bring himself to leave behind. Why? Before him, a gray manor lies dying, cracked mortar, a shutter swinging from its last hinge. Horses gone to bone in the dark of the stable. Someone lied to the crown. Someone had been planned with this for 3 months. And a letter, the ink still wet, waits on a desk. Somewhere beyond the ice, a girl is washing linens, smiling, believing she's about to be married. She doesn't know they never meant to wed her. They meant to. The crown was locked in its cedar box. The box sat on the shelf where it always sat. Behind the glass, behind the guard, behind 3 corridors and a door that required 2 keys and 1 man whose entire job was to stand in front of it. Kidden left it there. He left the rings too, both of them. The ceremonial one with the northern seal, and the plain silver band he wore on his right hand, on days when he needed to remember what he was actually fighting for. He left the coat with the fur collar, the boots with the silver clasps, the horse with the northern banner stitched into the saddle blanket. He took the old wool cloak, the patched one, the one his steward had tried to throw twice and Caden had kept pulling back from the discard pile without entirely knowing why. He knew why now. It looked like nothing, like nobody. Like a man with a long ride behind him and no particular reason to be looked at. That was exactly what he needed. The council meeting had lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of men talking about Ironfield Manor like it was a ledger entry. Like the Alliance was a column of numbers that needed to balance. Like the girl in the portrait on the table was a figure in a calculation who woke up every morning in a house she hadn't chosen and made the best of what was in front of her. Someone passed the portrait around. Caden looked at it once, a young woman in a blue gown, hair arranged carefully, hands folded in her lap. Expression composed in the particular way of someone who had been told exactly how to sit for exactly this kind of painting. He couldn't read her at all, which was either a sign of excellent training or a sign that the painter had never actually looked at her. His chief advisor, Gideon, a broad man in his late 50s, with the unhurried manner of someone who had survived enough political weather to stop being surprised by any single storm, had laid out the terms clearly: alliance, border stability, trade agreements. The girl's name used approximately 6 times in 40 minutes of discussion, always in reference to something else. Never on its own. Caden listened to all of it. Then he stood up, walked to the table, and turned the portrait face down. The room went quiet. "I'm going north," he said. Gideon looked at him, the look of a man who had served a king long enough to be lucky to know when not to ask questions. "When?" "Now. And your council appearance? Tomorrow, postpone it. And the trade delegation from the eastern ports?" Gideon: "Yes. Stop asking." He rode for 2 days. Pine forest and frozen creek beds and 1 roadside inn, where he paid for a room with coin he'd been carrying in the lining of his cloak for exactly this kind of situation. The kind of situation where a king needs to be a nobody for a while. He slept badly, not because of the inn, which was fine, because of the portrait. The folded hands, the arranged hair, the expression that gave him nothing. He needed to see her before anything was signed. That was the reason he gave himself. It was only partly true. The full truth was this: he had been making decisions about people based on reports and portraits and second-hand accounts for 12 years. And he was tired of being wrong. Tired of walking into rooms full of consequences he had agreed to from a distance, based on informations provided by people who had their own reasons for telling him what they told him. He wanted to look at her himself, with his own eyes, in a real place, without anyone watching him look. That was the thing about being a king that nobody told you when you were young. You stopped seeing things directly. Everything came through a filter, an advisor, a report, a portrait turned face down on a table. He was done with the filter. For now, Ironfield Manor appeared on the horizon on the morning of the third day. Gray towers, iron gate, pine trees along the northern wall, dark and still in the cold, frost on the road. The kind of morning that made everything look like it was waiting for something. Caden slowed his horse, looked at the gate, not the way a visitor looks at a gate, not with arrival, with assessment, with the particular attention of a man who was deciding something. Had already started deciding it, maybe, 2 days ago on a road through frozen pine trees. He rode in with his hood up and his posture easy and his name, for the purposes of that morning, as Ash, short, forgettable. The kind of name that didn't invite follow-up questions. The steward at the gate was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the distracted energy of someone already managing 3 problems before noon. Caden gave him the story without being asked. A servant from Lord Brennan's household, riding ahead with correspondence. Needing a warm place to wait, the steward didn't look at him twice, because that was the thing about invisibility. It wasn't about disguise. It was about expectation. Give a man the shape of what he's already looking for. He fills in the rest himself. The steward pointed him toward the kitchen courtyard. Caden thanked him with the quiet, slightly downward gaze he'd been practicing in the mirror of the roadside inn, the expression of a man who expected nothing and deserved less. Then he walked into the courtyard and started learning the house. Ironfield was not what the reports had described. This was the first thing he noticed, and he noticed things quickly. Had been trained to, young, by men who understood that the difference between a king who survived and a king who didn't was usually whether he paid attention in the first 10 minutes of an unfamiliar room. The reports had described Ironfield as a stable estate. Modest, yes, but functional, well-maintained. Lord Aldrich of Ironfield as a careful steward of his lands. Not wealthy, but solvent. What Caden saw was different. The mortar between the stones was cracked, not in 1 or 2 places. Systematically, the kind of cracking that happened when maintenance had been deferred for years, not months. The upper window on the east wall hung from a single hinge. The rope line in the courtyard frayed at both ends. The horses in the stable were thin in the way of animals, whose grain ration had been quietly reduced. Not a crumbling house, not yet, but a house running out of time, using everything it had left to look like it wasn't. Someone had sent inaccurate reports to the northern capital. Someone had described this place as stable. Caden stood near the woodpile at the edge of the courtyard and stored that away. Then he started stacking logs he didn't need to stack, and he waited. She came through the door at 6:30. He knew it was her. Not because she matched the portrait. She didn't, particularly. The portrait had shown a composed young woman in formal blue. This woman was in a plain gray dress under a wool shawl that had unraveled at one corner and dragged along the frost-covered stones behind her. Hair loose and slightly tangled from sleep. Feet in worn leather slippers that were entirely wrong for the weather. But he knew it was her, because of the way she moved, not the movement itself, which was quick and efficient, the movement of someone who'd done this task 100 times. The quality underneath it, the set of her shoulders, the way her attention was inward, entirely, while her hands worked through familiar motions on the outside. Like most of her was somewhere else, had learned to be somewhere else, while her body handled the mechanics of the morning. He recognized that. Recognized it the way you recognize something you'd been doing yourself for, so long you'd stopped noticing it. She dropped the basket near the stone basin, pushed her hair from her face with the back of her wrist, started pulling wet linens out one by one, shaking them hard before hanging them on the rope line on. Her breath came in small white clouds in the cold air. She didn't notice him, which was fine, expected. He was just another body in the gray morning, unremarkable, invisible. He kept stacking logs, and watched. The 2 women came through the door 7 minutes later. He clocked them immediately. Not servants. Not quite nobility either. The comfortable and dangerous middle ground of female relatives. living in a house that wasn't theirs. Dressed better than Wren, hair pinned under linen caps. The particular posture of women who had decided years ago that they deserved better than this, and had never fully gotten over not getting it. The taller one spoke first, loud enough that it wasn't for Wren. It was for the courtyard. You left the good basin cloth inside again. A pause with nothing patient in it. I told you yesterday. White linens go first. Wren didn't turn around. I'll get them in the next round. The next round, the tall one, repeated it like she was teaching a slow child. The same lesson for the 8th time. Wren. Party, spawn day. One day. And you cannot manage a simple order of linen. I managed all of this. Wren's hand gestured at the full rope line without her turning around. Those are household rags. The shorter one, rounder, stepped forward. Clicked her tongue. Honestly, cousin. The word cousin delivered like a reminder that even blood could be a burden. I've said it to Mother a dozen times. I don't understand why Uncle put your name forward for this arrangement. You don't know how to present yourself. You don't speak with any refinement. And you spend half your mornings doing the work of the kitchen girls as though you have nothing better to occupy your time. Wren turned then, slowly, and her face was still. Not the stillness of someone who had nothing to say, the stillness of someone holding something much larger underneath. The kind of stillness Caden had worn in council chambers when men twice his age had said things designed to diminish him, and he couldn't afford to let them see the size of his response. Aunt Vera asked me to help this morning, Wren said. Quiet, even. 2 of the kitchen girls are unwell. I was being useful. You were hiding. The tall one, flat, sure of herself. You always hide when there's something uncomfortable to face. This contract is not going to disappear because you bury yourself in other people's laundry. She paused. Let her gaze move over Wren slowly. The kind of assessment designed to be felt. You should pray the king's men see something worth the alliance, us. When they arrive, because from where I stand, your uncle is offering them very little. And you... She stopped, looked at the shorter one. The shorter one laughed. Quick, bright. The kind of laugh that was worse than whatever came before it. Then they turned and went back inside. The door closed, not a slam. A dull wooden sound that somehow carried more weight than a slam would have. The courtyard went quiet. The older woman near the kitchen wall kept her eyes on her mortar. The stable boy carrying wood looked at the ground. The groundsman by the gate had found something very interesting about the wheel he was repairing. Everyone had agreed without discussing it that witnessing this kind of moment was its own kind of danger. Wren stood with her back to the closed door, head slightly bowed. Her fingers moved against the rim of the basket, working at a loose piece of wicker, without knowing they were doing it. Her slippers were damp from the wet stones. There was a small red mark on her left wrist where the basket handle had dug in. She didn't cry, she didn't make a sound, but something in the line of her back, the particular quality of her stillness, the way she was holding herself together with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for a very long time. Kaiden set down the log in his hand, carefully. The way you set something down when you're not sure what you'll do if your hands are occupied with it. She looked up directly at him, and he held her gaze, a half-second too long for a servant. Too steady for a man with nothing to hide. He saw the uncertainty move through her eyes. Quick. Instinctive, the flicker of someone registering that something wasn't quite what it appeared, without yet knowing why. He looked down at the logs, heard her footsteps cross the courtyard, slow and even. Stop a few feet away, I don't know you, she said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, quiet but not soft, not the softness of timidity. The careful weight of someone who had learned to spend words deliberately. Ash, he said without looking up. Sent from Lord Brennan's household. Waiting on correspondence. A pause. Lord Brennan's household is 2 days south, she said. I rode through part of the night. Another silence. Longer. He could feel her attention on him. The same quality of focus she'd brought to the laundry line. Unhurried, complete. The attention of someone who looked at things long enough to actually see them. "There's porridge left from breakfast," she said. The kitchen door's unlocked. "Help yourself before it goes cold." He looked up because he couldn't stop himself. She was already walking away, basket under her arm, the loose corner of her shawl trailing across the frost-gray stones behind her. She didn't look back. She moved like a woman who had offered the only small kindness available to her and expected nothing in return for it. Caden stood in the cold morning air with a log in each hand and felt something shift in his chest. He didn't have a name for it yet. He spent the afternoon learning the house, not out of strategy, out of habit. The same habit that had kept him alive through 12 years of ruling a kingdom where not everyone had wanted him to succeed. You learned a place by moving through it, by paying attention to the spaces nobody noticed, the back corridors, the storage rooms, the stable yard after dark. He talked to 4 people before supper, a stable boy named Pellin, barely 15, talked too freely and too fast, which meant nobody had ever taught him to be careful. Told Caden more than he knew he was telling him, a cook named Hilda, 60-ish. Sharp gray eyes that moved over Caden once, and then decided apparently that he wasn't worth her suspicion, which meant she talked freely while she worked. Better source than the boy. A groundsman who said almost nothing, but whose expression, when Lord Aldrich's name came up in passing, was the expression of a man who had stopped expecting things to get better, and a man he didn't catch the name of immediately. Broad-shouldered, mid-40s, well-dressed for a household steward, close trim beard, pale eyes that moved too quickly. This one introduced himself the next afternoon near the woodshed. Silas, Lord Aldrich's personal secretary. He smiled at Caden with the smooth, practiced warmth of someone who had learned that smiling was its own kind of armor. "Settling in?" Silas asked. Hands clasped behind his back, relaxed. "Easy. Well enough," Caden said. Silas looked at the woodpile. Something moved behind his eyes. "Quick assessing Lord Brennan's man," he said. "Waiting on papers." "That's right, long ride for papers." "Lord Brennan is thorough." A pause. The frost hissed softly on the stones around them. Silas smiled again. Same smile. "Precise, unmoved. Supper's in the main kitchen for the household staff," he said. "You're welcome to it." He turned and walked back toward the manor, without waiting for a response. Caden watched him go. His eyes moved too quickly, not like a man watching a place. Like a man counting a place, cataloging it. The difference was subtle. But it was there. This man wasn't a secretary, or he wasn't only a secretary. He found the letter that evening, on the surface of Silas's writing desk. In the south corridor, not in a drawer, not hidden, left out, like an oversight. Maybe an oversight. Caden stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the sleeping house. Before he moved to the desk, picked up the paper, 4 lines. "The girl is ready. Do not let her suspect anything before the signing. No name. No seal. Ink still slightly damp at the edges. Written within the last 12 hours. He started to fold it back, then stopped. Looked at the handwriting again. Something pulled at the edge of his memory. A specific hook, the slight leftward lean of the letters. The way the capital D was formed. He'd seen this handwriting before. Not here. Not recently. He'd seen it in a report. 3 months ago. A status report on Ironfield Manor submitted through the standard administrative channels to the northern capital. A report describing Ironfield as solvent, stable, well-maintained. A report that was wrong. Silas hadn't just arrived at Ironfield. Silas, or whoever Silas was, had been inside the information network, feeding reports to Caden's capital, long before the marriage proposal had been formally discussed. This wasn't opportunism. This was planning. He was in the stable loft by midnight, lying on his back in the hay with his boots still on, staring at the low ceiling, turning everything over with the careful, unhurried deliberateness of a man who had learned that thinking fast was usually the same as thinking wrong. What he had. One letter in a handwriting that matched a falsified report. A secretary who moved his eyes like someone counting inventory. A house in much worse financial shape than anyone in the northern capital had been told. And a girl who spent her mornings doing other people's laundry in damp slippers and offered porridge to strangers without asking anything in return what he didn't have. The full picture, the name behind Silas, the destination behind the letter, the timeline behind the phrase before the signing. What he needed, Gideon, who was, at that moment, riding toward Ironfield on the original schedule. 4 days out, or so he'd thought. Gideon arrived the next morning, not in 4 days, in 1. Because Gideon had felt the unease of this particular mission from the moment Caden had ridden out alone, had pushed the pace without being asked, had trusted, after 30 years of reading this particular king, that the early arrival would be needed rather than questioned. The hoofbeats came through the iron gate while the frost was still thick on the courtyard stones. 6 riders, the Northern Territory's gray banner folded flat against the saddlebags, deliberately inconspicuous for an official delegation, which told Caden exactly how seriously his people took their instructions. He watched from the shadow of the stable doorway, arms crossed, expression neutral. The household erupted behind him. Calla and Drea suddenly very interested in their hair, the steward dropping something in the front corridor. Lord Aldrich's voice rising briefly and then resettling itself into careful calm. Gideon dismounted in the courtyard with the careful movements of a man whose knees had been complaining about long rides for the past decade. He handed his reins to the stable boy, stood looking around the manor grounds with the expression he always wore when assessing a new place. Mouth slightly pursed, eyes moving slowly, taking inventory. Then he saw Caden, standing in the stable doorway, patched cloak, rough wool. 3 days of road still visible on him. Gideon's eyes moved from the cloak to the tunic to the face. The only sign of his reaction was a very slight tightening at the corners of his eyes. He walked toward Caden at a normal pace. Cliss stopped beside the woodpile, close enough to speak quietly. "My lord," he said, just above a whisper. "I won't explain," Caden said. "I won't ask. I need 4 minutes." He talked fast, quiet, eyes moving across the courtyard while he spoke the letter, the handwriting, and the falsified report. Silas's eyes, the state of the manor versus the official description, the phrase before the signing, Wren. And what he'd observed in 24 hours, Gideon listened without interrupting. When Caden finished, there was a brief silence. "The name Vex mean anything to you?" Gideon said. Caden looked at him. "Should it? Dorian Vex, merchant lord out of the western coast. Operates in roughly 6 different kinds of legal gray." Gideon's voice stayed even, careful. The voice of a man delivering a brief he'd been sitting on for too long. Runs properties in the interior. Nobody official has ever successfully inspected them. Why not? Because every time someone gets close, the paperwork changes and the relevant parties become difficult to locate. A pause. There have been rumors about those properties. About the kind of people who go in. Another pause. Shorter. And don't come out the same way they went in. Caden was quiet for a moment. "How long have there been rumors?" Gideon didn't answer immediately. "Long enough that I should have brought you a formal report before now," he said finally. Something in his voice that lived close to guilt. The evidence was never solid enough to act on. "He's careful. He's careful," Caden repeated, very quietly. "Yes." Caden looked across the courtyard at the manor's back door, closed. No damp slippers on the frost. No basket of wet linen. "Is there any connection," he said, "between Vex and a man going by the name Silas, secretary to Lord Aldrich of Ironfield?" Gideon was quiet. "That's the thing I need to find out," he said. "Then find it," Caden said. "Tonight." He saw her again that evening, not in the courtyard. He'd gone back to the woodshed at dusk, moving slowly, looking purposeful without having a purpose. The kind of low-level movement that was invisible in a busy household. She was in the window. 2nd floor, north-facing. the only lit window on that side of the manor at that hour. She was standing with one hand pressed flat against the glass, looking down at the courtyard, and then she was looking at him. He didn't look away, neither. Did she not for a long moment? He couldn't read her expression from the courtyard. Too much distance, too little light. But the quality of it, the steadiness, the particular stillness of someone who is thinking something through. He looked down first, because it was what a servant would do, but it cost him something. Small. Not nothing. That night he lay on his back in the hay with his boots still on, the low creak of the stable around him. One horse shifting in its stall. The thin light from the east window that would be the first marker of dawn, he thought. About Wren, not about the contract, not about the alliance. Not about what it meant politically that a girl being proposed as a marriage candidate was apparently at the center of a scheme that reached back 3 months into the reporting channels of his own administration. Just about her, the set of her shoulders in the courtyard, the way she hadn't broken, the way she'd moved after Calla and Drea went back inside. Slowly, the trailing corner of the shawl on the stones. Like a woman who had given herself 30 seconds to feel something and was now putting it away. The porridge, help yourself before it goes cold. No name, no negotiation, no expectation of anything in return. Just the recognition that a man standing in cold air at 6:30 in the morning probably needed something warm. He thought about that for a long time. Then he thought about the word delivery, because that was the word forming in the back of his mind now. Not from the letter on Silas's desk, which hadn't used it. From Gideon's careful brief. From the shape of what hadn't been said. From the rumors about properties where people went in and didn't come out the same. Delivery was the word that fit the shape of this. Wren had been put forward as a marriage candidate. Presented, positioned, prepared, given a reason to be cooperative and presentable and unaware. And the official contract, the one with the northern seal and the formal language and the advance party riding in with gray banners, all of it was apparently functioning as cover for something else. Something that used the word delivery, and that word, in that context, meant something Caden was not going to let happen. The morning of the second day came in gray and cold. He was in the kitchen before the household was properly awake. Stack of logs from the woodshed, door unlatched. The fire already going, banked from the night. He set the wood down beside the box near the hearth, straightened. Wren was standing at the far end of the kitchen counter. She hadn't heard him come in. Or she had, and she was choosing not to acknowledge it yet. Which with her was also possible. She was looking at the fire with the expression of someone not quite awake. One hand wrapped around a clay mug. The other tucked against her side. She'd braided her hair today, tight and neat. Her dress was the same plain gray. Her boots were laced. She looked like someone who had decided, deliberately, to pull herself together this morning. He set the logs into the box quietly, turned. She was looking at him. Lord Brennan's household uses a burgundy seal on their correspondence, she said. I've seen it enough times to know it. He didn't respond. The seal on the letter you had in your coat when you arrived was dark blue. She tilted her head slightly. With a mark I didn't recognize, the kitchen was very quiet. Just the fire. The faint sound of someone moving in a corridor above. The cold air from the gap under the door. He looked at her. She looked back. I'm not from Lord Brennan's household, he said. I know, she said. I've known since yesterday, she said it without heat. Without triumph. Like a fact that had been sitting in her pocket and she was simply taking it out now because the moment called for it. He didn't respond immediately. You moved the woodpile, she said. The afternoon you arrived. From the right side of the shed to the left, the wind was coming from the east. It's better protected on the left. I've been stacking it on the right for 3 winters. It's not always going to come from the same direction. A pause. No, she said. It's not. She looked at him for a long moment. Not accusatory. Not alarmed. the same careful, unhurried quality of attention she'd had in the courtyard. The look of someone willing to wait until they'd seen enough to decide. "Are you here to harm me?" she asked, direct. Simple. The question of someone who had decided there was no point in approaching it sideways. "No," he said. She held his gaze. Then she turned back to the fire. "There's porridge on the left hook," she said. "It's still warm." He found Gideon near the stable before noon. The older man was examining the condition of a fence post, with the focused attention of someone who was not actually interested in fence posts. He looked up when Caden approached. His expression said he had something. "The desk in the south corridor," Gideon said low. "The locked drawer. I need tonight to get into it cleanly. What do you know already?" Enough to be concerned. Gideon looked at the fence post. "There's a name I keep finding in the edges of things here. In the way the correspondence is organized, in the routing of certain financial documents." He paused. "The handwriting on the falsified report. I think I know whose it is, Silas." Gideon looked at him. "How long have you known?" "Since last night." "The letter on the desk." "Same handwriting as the report." "If it's what I think it is," Gideon said slowly, "then Silas didn't come to Ironfield to serve Lord Aldrich. He came here with a specific purpose. And the marriage proposal, the formal arrangement, everything being prepared for the signing." He stopped. "It's cover," Caden said. "Yes, for what exactly?" "That's what's in the locked drawer." A pause. "Tonight," Caden said. Tonight, Gideon agreed. The afternoon brought Silas again. Caden was in the woodshed when Silas appeared in the doorway. Same easy posture, same precise smile. The hands-behind-back stance of a man who had decided years ago that looking relaxed was the same as being in control. "The advance party seems to be settling in well," Silas said. "Seems like it," Caden said. "Long ride from the north." "Most rides from the north are," Silas laughed. "Easy. Warm. Like a man who found everything slightly amusing in a benevolent way." "Lord Aldrich is eager for tomorrow to go smoothly," Silas said. "A great deal depends on this arrangement, I'm sure." "For both families," he paused. "Just a beat. And for Wren, of course. A good match for her, stability, a future that Ironfield alone couldn't offer." He said her name, like it was a piece on a board. Caden looked at him. "Just for a moment. Just long enough to make it slightly too long." "Lord Brennan is particular about his correspondence," Caden said. "I should check on it." He moved past Silas and out of the woodshed. Behind him, he heard nothing. No movement. No reaction, which was its own kind of answer. The window was lit again that evening, second floor, north-facing. This time she wasn't standing at the glass. She was sitting in the chair by his side, her profile visible. The faint warm light of a single candle behind her. A book open in her lap. Her attention, somewhere far away from the page. Caden stood in the courtyard below and watched her the way you watched something you were trying to understand. Not the surface of it, the structure underneath. Girl who noticed wrong seals on letters she had no official reason to examine. Who read the books in a half-empty library until she understood trading codes from the western coast. Who spent 3 years stacking wood on the same side of the same shed and knew it so well she could tell from a second-floor window when someone had changed it. Who had been told, her entire life, that she was not enough. And who had, apparently, decided at some point not to believe that, or maybe just decided not to care. He wasn't sure which was braver. She looked up, directly down at the courtyard, directly at him. He didn't look away this time. Neither did she. Below the window, in the frost of a second night, something that had been unnamed in Cade's chest since yesterday's began quietly to acquire a shape. He didn't name it yet. It was too early for names. She found him at the woodpile before dawn. She came through the kitchen door at 5:30, earlier than usual. Fully dressed, hair braided, boots laced properly. But her eyes had the look of someone who had been awake for hours before deciding to get up. Which, because he'd had that look himself for the past 2 days. She stopped. Looked at him in the gray pre-dawn. "You're here early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She was quiet for a moment. "The advance party arrived yesterday," she said. "I noticed. The signing is today." She said it evenly, like reading a line from a document. "This afternoon, I know." She looked at him, and there was something in her face he hadn't seen before. Not the practiced stillness, not the careful economy of someone managing what she showed. Something more direct, like she'd made a decision in the dark of a sleepless night to stop spending the energy it took to maintain a certain kind of distance. "There's something wrong with this arrangement," she said. "I don't know what, but I've known it for weeks and I don't know who to." She stopped, looked away. "You don't know who to tell," he said. She was quiet. "No," she said, very quietly. He looked at her, the gray morning around them, the frost on the stones, the rope line empty in the cold, the whole sleeping house behind its cracked mortar and hanging shutters. Holding all the things it hadn't said. "I know what's wrong," he said. She looked at him. "I need to show you something," he paused. "But not here. Not like this." "When?" "This afternoon." "The library, if that's—" "Yes," she said, no hesitation. Just the word. He nodded. She looked at him for a moment longer. That careful, complete attention. Then she looked at the woodpile. "You stacked the east side lower," she said. "Wind's coming from the west today." A pause. "How can you tell?" "The way the smoke moves from the chimney." She looked at the chimney, looked back at him. "You notice things," she said. Not quite a question. "Yes," he said. "So do I," she said. And she went back inside. The morning passed slowly. Gideon had signaled at breakfast with a very slight nod. The locked drawer. Done. Resealed. The contents documented. Whatever was in that drawer, Gideon had it. And Gideon's face, over a bowl of morning porridge in the main kitchen, had the expression of a man who'd confirmed something he'd been hoping was wrong. Silas moved through the house that morning like a machine, smooth and efficient, always between Lord Aldrich's study and the front corridor, and the room where the signing papers were being arranged. Always helpful, always slightly too present. The particular attentiveness of someone managing multiple things that the people around him didn't know needed managing. Caden watched him from corners. Lord Aldrich appeared once, briefly, in the entrance hall. A tall man, thin in the way of someone who'd once been broader and had diminished without noticing it. His hair had gone mostly gray. He moved with the careful deliberateness of a man carrying more weight than was visible. He stopped in the hallway, looked down the corridor toward the kitchen. Something moved across his face, too brief to read. Then he went back into his study and closed the door. Caden stood in the corridor afterward. Thought about what that look had been. Wasn't sure. Stored it away. She was in the library at 2 in the afternoon. He knew because he'd learned the house well enough by now to know where she went when she needed to be alone. The library. Always. The library. Because it was cold and dim and half empty and no one else wanted it. He climbed the east stair, the one she'd mentioned casually 2 days ago, not knowing he'd stored it. The only stair in the house that no one with a reason to watch him used. He checked the corridor. Empty. Knocked once. "Come in," she said. He entered, closed the door behind him, checked the corridor one more time through the gap before letting it shut. She was in the chair, by the window, book in her lap. She wasn't reading it. She'd probably known that from the moment she sat down. She looked at him, and he crossed the room, sat down across from her, not standing over her, level with her, because this conversation needed to be between two people, not between a person and a position. She noticed. He could see that she noticed. "My name is not Ash," he said. She said nothing, just waited. He looked at her, at the still face, the careful hands. The woman who had carried a piece of fear alone for 2 days because she hadn't known who to tell, and had chosen to carry it rather than trust the wrong person with it. "My name is Kaiden," he said 3 words. But they were the 3 words that changed the shape of the room. Her face didn't move, but her eyes did. Something in them shifted. Not alarm, not the outward expression of someone processing a shock, more like someone hearing a sound they'd been half expecting, and feeling the size of it now that it had arrived. "You came here yourself," she said. "Yes, in borrowed clothes. Yes, to see me." A pause. "Before the contract," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. Outside the window, the frost had turned to thin gray drizzle. The pine trees stood dark and still. The smell of rain on old stone came through the gap at the bottom of the frame, mixed with the dust and leather of the room. "What did you hear?" she said. "In the courtyard the morning you arrived. Enough." "Enough to what?" "Enough to understand," he said, "that whatever you've been told about this arrangement is not the same as what's being told in certain other rooms." Silence. Then very quietly, "Harwick," she said. His expression shifted. "Where did you hear that name, my uncle?" "This morning. Speaking to Silas." "I was passing and wasn't meant to hear." She watched his face. "What is it?" she said. "What does it mean?" He looked at her, this woman, in a cold library, in worn boots, with a book she hadn't been reading in her lap, and a piece of fear she'd been carrying alone for 2 days. 3 years of wood, stacked on the right side of a shed, before someone thought to move it to the sheltered side. He'd come to Ironfield to observe, to assess, to make a rational decision about a political contract with the cold efficiency of a man who had learned that sentiment was a luxury his position could not afford. He had not come to have a conversation that mattered. He was about to have one anyway. "I'm going to tell you the truth," he said. "All of it. It's going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to hear it clearly. Because what happens in the next 24 hours depends on you understanding exactly what kind of danger you're standing in." She looked at him. "Steady. Tell me," she said. And he did. He told her everything. Not the softened version. Not the version with the edges rounded off to make it easier to receive. The full weight of it, laid flat on the table between them like evidence. Like something that deserved to be seen clearly before anyone decided what to do about it. He told her about Astorian Vex, merchant lord of the western coast. 6 kinds of legal gray, and properties in the interior that no official inspection had ever successfully entered, properties where people went in and didn't come out the same. He told her about the letter on Silas's desk, the handwriting that matched the falsified report sent to the northern capital 3 months ago. The report designed to make the marriage proposal look like routine political business instead of bait. He told her about Gideon, about the locked drawer, about what Gideon's face had looked like over a bowl of morning porridge when he'd confirmed his worst suspicion. He told her about the word that kept appearing in the shape of this thing, delivery. He said that word and watched her face. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She sat in the chair by the window, with the drizzle running down the glass behind her and the book still in her lap and her hands folded on top of it. And she listened to every word with the focused stillness of someone who had made a decision, somewhere in the middle of the telling, to let it land fully instead of bracing against it, which was one of the bravest things he'd ever seen. And he'd seen a lot of things. When he finished, the library was very quiet, just the drizzle, the creak of the old window frame. Somewhere below, a door then. "My uncle," she said. "Does he know what Silas actually is?" Careful question. Precise. The question of someone separating what they feared from what they could confirm. "I don't know yet," Caden said. "That's part of what Gideon is finding out." She nodded. "Very small. Very even. And the contract," she said. "The official one. The marriage arrangement. That's real?" "Yes, but it was never meant to complete." "No." She looked at the window, the rain, on the glass. "It's a stage," she said quietly. "The contract, the advance party, all of it. It's a stage so I look like I'm going somewhere legitimate. So I walk out the door cooperatively because I think I'm going to a wedding." He said nothing. Because she'd just said it better than he had. She looked back at him, and her face was still. Not emptiness. The opposite of emptiness. The held stillness of someone managing something much larger underneath. The way a dam manages water. And the water was very, very present, my uncle. she said again. He would have had to agree to something, sign something. Even if he didn't know the full shape of it. Yes, how much? He understood what she was asking. Didn't soften it. Enough to clear his debts, he said, and keep Ironfield standing for another decade. She absorbed that, one breath. 2. All right, she said. Just that. All right, and then, what do you need me to expected anger, or tears, or the particular frozen paralysis of someone overwhelmed past their capacity to respond. He'd seen all three, in council chambers and throne rooms and the private conversations that happened after the public ones. He had not expected that, the directness of it, the immediate movement from receiving something devastating to asking what came next. Like grief was something she could process in parallel, while still operating, while still thinking. He looked at her, in the gray library light, in worn boots, with a book in her lap she'd stopped pretending to read 3 days ago, and something in his chest settled, certain, the way a compass needle settles when it finds its direction. Tonight, he said, I need you to do nothing differently. Dinner with the family. Polite, composed, exactly what they expect. I can do that. Tomorrow morning, Silas will give you instructions about the signing ceremony. Follow them, and not let him know anything has changed. Yes, she held his gaze. And you? She said. Silas sent word to Vex that the timeline is confirmed. I need to find that correspondence before it leaves the manor grounds. Once I have it, I have everything needed to move against Vex legally. Permanently, he paused. But I need one more night inside this house to do it. She was quiet for a moment. Thinking, not hesitating, there was a difference, and he'd learned to read it. Then she said, the library. No one comes here. What? She looked around the room, the half-empty shelves, the broken clock, the 3 ceramic jars nobody had ever used. There's a door at the back, behind the far shelf. It connects to the east servant's stair, the only stair in the house that Silas doesn't use. He looked at her. You can work from here tonight, she said. Without anyone knowing, he held her gaze. She looked back at him with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had just been told the ground beneath her had been hollow the entire time, and had decided, without any drama about it, to keep standing on it. Thank you, he said. She shook her head. Very slightly. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me when it's over. She left the library first. He waited 4 minutes, then followed by the east stair. In the corridor below, the house moved through its afternoon preparations, silverware being counted in the dining room. Calla's voice somewhere near the front stairs, bright and carrying, talking about what she planned to wear to the signing. The steward crossing the entrance hall with a stack of pressed linens. Nobody looked at him. He was the woodshed man, the correspondent waiter, the nobody from Lord Brennan's household who was apparently very committed to his cover story. He found Gideon in the stable yard at 3:30. Both of them looking at the same horse, both giving the impression of men discussing something unremarkable about travel distance. The drawer, Caden said. Low, done, Gideon said. Resealed. He won't know. What was in it? Gideon was quiet for a moment. More than I hoped, he said, less than I feared. But Caden. He paused. There was something else. He reached into the front of his coat and produced a small card, flat, about the size of a calling card. He held it out at his side without looking at it. Caden took it without looking down later. The stable loft. Candle burned low. He looked at it. A card, gold, small. A symbol, pressed into the metal, not engraved, pressed, with the kind of tool used in workshops that made things meant to last. A symbol he recognized, the mark of the Vex family line. Western Coast. Old money, turned to new operations. The mark used on contracts, on property deeds, on the kind of official documents that needed an identity attached to them. It was the mark of Dorian Vex. Found in a drawer in Ironfield Manor, in the possession of a man called Calliscus, who had arrived 4 months ago to serve as a personal secretary. Caden turned the card over, on the back, in that same familiar handwriting. MC, Fight 7. On MC, Silas had initials. And they weren't anything. He was at the library door at 8 o'clock. The household had settled into its evening routine. Dinner finished. Calla and Drea in the sitting room. Lord Aldrich in his study with the door closed. The advance party in the guest wing. Silas last seen, moving between the south corridor and the entrance hall with the quiet efficiency of a man conducting a final inventory. Caden knocked once. Low. The door opened. Wren was sitting at the table with a single candle and 3 books open in front of her. Reference books, not pleasure reading. She looked up. "Close it," she said. He did. The back door behind the far shelf was slightly ajar. Escape route if needed. She'd already thought of it. "I need to tell you something first," he said. She looked at him. "Silas isn't his name," Caden said. "The card in the drawer. Initials on the back. MC, I don't have the full name yet. But he didn't come here as Lord Aldrich's secretary." She absorbed this. "Quick. He came here as himself," she said. "Whoever that is, yes. Which means my uncle didn't hire a man who turned out to have dangerous connections." She paused. "He was approached by the connection. Directly. That's what I think." She looked at the candle for a moment. "That makes it worse," she said. "Yes, for my uncle. Yes." She picked up the nearest book, set it aside, straightened the edge of her papers. "All right," she said. "Work. I'll stay quiet." He worked for 2 hours. The documents from the drawer, which Gideon had copied in full before resealing, laid out across the table. 3 pages of careful, lawyerly language. The kind of language that said something very specific in the simplest possible way. Wren, if delivered, in exchange for payment in 2 installments. The second installment contingent on delivery. He read the word delivery 4 times. Each time it landed the same way. Like something hitting stone he didn't look at her while he read it. He kept his face even, filed what he felt in the place where he put things he'd deal with later. A well-practiced system. 12 years old at 10 o'clock, she said very quietly. "I found something." He looked up. She was holding a piece of paper, small, folded twice. She held it flat on her palm and looked at it with the expression of someone who had been deciding for 2 days what to do with the thing they were carrying. "I've had this since 2 days before you arrived," she said. He waited. "Silas bumped into me in the east corridor. He dropped it." She paused. "I don't think he knew. He turned around and looked, but I'd already moved past the corner. I found it on the floor when I went back." She held it out. He took it, unfolded it. Trading symbols. Western coastal notation. The kind of shorthand used in commercial operations that didn't want their meaning obvious to casual readers. He could read most of it. He'd made a point of learning most things that were designed to be difficult. The symbols described a transfer, a transport arrangement, timing within a day of the signing, written in plain text. Wren of Ironfield, as arranged, WV. 7. He looked up. She was watching him. "You've been carrying this for 2 days, he said. "Yes. Why didn't you tell someone?" She looked at him and said nothing, because the answer was already in the room. Because she'd said it that morning in the kitchen. Tell who? He held the piece of paper and felt something shift that had nothing to do with the investigation. Everything to do with the particular weight of what it meant to carry a piece of fear with no one to hand it to. "Why did you tell me?" he said. She considered this. "Because you moved the woodpile," she said. He looked at her. "And because you sat down," she said. "In this room. When you could have stood," he didn't respond. "You made yourself level," she said simply. "People who are going to use you don't bother doing that." He started to fold the paper, then stopped. "WV7, he said. "You see this notation at the bottom?" "Yes, WV7, in the card I found. MC, V7. She went 7, she said. "The same." "Yes, what does it mean?" He looked at her. "I think it means Silas isn't working for Vex," he said. "I think it means Silas is Vex." The room was very quiet. The candle moved in a draft from the window gap. "He's here himself," she said. "Yes. In this house. For 4 months. Yes, she looked at the table. At nothing in particular. He had dinner with us last week, she said. He helped me carry the storm shutters when the east window came loose. She paused. He was very helpful. Something in the way she said that last word, flat, without inflection. The sound of a woman recalibrating everything she'd filed under one category and understanding it belonged in a different one entirely. He wanted to be, Caden said. Yes, she said. I know. Gideon arrived at midnight. East stair. Quiet as a man his size could manage, which was quieter than expected. He came through the back door behind the shelf. Looked at the papers on the table. Looked at Wren, looked at Caden, said nothing about any of it, sat down. Read for 15 minutes. The only sounds were the candle and the occasional shift of paper. Then Gideon set the last page down, placed both palms flat on the table, looked at Caden. We have enough, he said, to move against Vex, against the whole operation. If we move quickly, he paused. The Western properties, the transport arrangements. This notation connects the Ironfield arrangement to its three others in the least three others. Year. His voice was even, careful, the voice of a man delivering information he wished were different. She's not the first they've done this with. Wren looked at the table she already knew, or had suspected. But hearing it said plainly was different. How many? She said. Gideon looked at her. We don't have a complete number yet, she nodded, once. Precise then, but you will. Yes, Gideon said. We will. The decision nearly broke everything. This was the part Kaiden would return to later, in quieter moments. The moment he'd moved too fast, it was 1 in the morning. Gideon had the full documentation. The plan was to let the morning come. Let Silas move through his preparations. Let the signing ceremony begin to take shape, and arrest him when the moment was controlled. When there was no route out and no warning sent. Clean. Careful. Done properly. But Kaiden had sat in the library after Gideon left, turning the gold card in his fingers, reading WV 7 for the 9th time, and had made a decision. He'd gone to the south corridor, found 2 of Gideon's men who were part of the advance party, told them quietly. Silas was to have his movements restricted from tonight, not arrested, not confronted, just contained, watched. No correspondence leaving through him, reasonable, logical, too early. He knew it at 1:30. One of Gideon's men found him at the east stair. Spoke quickly and low, the evening food delivery. The man who brought the kitchen provisions at sundown. Usually a routine run, usually checked by the steward, but the steward had been occupied with the guest wing linens and had waved the delivery man through. Silas had been at the kitchen door when the delivery arrived, for approximately 4 minutes, long enough to pass how small, a folded note. The size of a calling card, gone before anyone thought to look. How long ago? Caden said. An hour, maybe a little more, an hour. He stood in the dark east corridor and felt the weight of that, an hour's head start. Delivered to someone outside Ironfield. Someone who was now aware that the timeline was in question. He had moved too fast. Given Silas exactly enough pressure to trigger the contingency, without being contained enough to stop the damage, he'd made the wrong call. He stood there with that for a long moment. Did not excuse it. Did not rationalize it. Just held it. The way you held the full weight of a mistake before you decided what to do about it. Then he went back to the library. Wren looked up when he came through the back door. Wryed his face in about 3 seconds. What happened? She said. He told her. Short. Direct. No softening. She's listened. He sent word out. She said, yes. To someone outside Fairfield. Yes. Who now knows something has changed. Yes. She looked at the candle. So, the morning is going to be faster than we planned, she said. Yes. And more unpredictable, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, does this change what I need to do tomorrow? He looked at her. No, he said. If anything, it makes it more important that you're exactly where he expects you to be. Doing exactly what he expects you to do, she nodded. All right, she said. Just that. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not going to ask me how I let it happen, he said. She looked up at him. A slight pause. You already know how it happened, she said. You don't need me to tell you. He was quiet. What I want to know, she said, is whether you can still fix it. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Then that's what matters. He went to Aldrich's study at 2:30. The house was deep in its sleeping hours. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just absent. The fire in the study had burned down to coals. One lamp. Aldrich was at his desk, with papers in front of him that he clearly hadn't been reading. He looked up when Caden entered, and something happened in his face, not surprise. More like the expression of a man who had been dreading a knock on the door for a long time and had just heard it. Caden closed the door, sat across the desk without being invited. Aldrich looked at him. You're not from Lord Brennan's household. No. A pause. How long have you been here? 3 days. Aldrich looked at his hands. The ring on his finger caught the lamplight. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you know, he said finally. Everything, Caden said. Aldrich closed his eyes, just for a moment. Just long enough to do the thing a man does when something he's been carrying finally becomes visible to someone else. Then he opened them. I needed money, he said. The debts go back 8 years. Bad harvests. Worse decisions. I made inquiries through a merchant contact about a private loan arrangement. He stopped. The contact arranged a meeting with an investor. A man named Silas, Caden said. He called himself Heron. I found out later that some of the paperwork used the name Silas. I didn't ask about the discrepancy. His voice was flat. I should have. Yes, he offered to settle the debts, in full, and fund the estate's operation for the next 10 years. In exchange for cooperation with the marriage arrangement. Aldrich looked at the papers in front of him. He said it was a straightforward alliance proposal, that the Northern Territories were genuinely interested in Wren as a candidate, that the contract was legitimate. Did you believe him? A long pause. I heard his name once, Aldrich said, 3 weeks ago, in a reference from the Eastern Port merchant. A name I recognized from a different kind of conversation, years ago. A name that should have made me stop and ask questions, but you didn't. No, why not? Aldrich was quiet for a very long time, because I didn't want to know, he said. Quiet, exact. The voice of a man who had been honest with himself about this at last, and didn't like what he found. Caden looked at him. That's the most dangerous thing a man can do, Caden said. Choose not to know so he doesn't have to choose what to do. Aldrich said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She doesn't know the full shape of this, Caden said. She knows some. She found a piece herself, 2 days ago, and carried it alone because she had no one to tell. Aldrich's jaw tightened. I didn't intend. I know what you intended, Caden's voice was steady, not raised, which somehow made it heavier. You intended to keep Ironfield standing. You intended to give your niece a future. You intended to manage a difficult situation without looking at it directly. He paused. The road to this moment is full of intentions. Lord Aldrich. What matters now is what you do tonight. Aldrich looked at him. What do you need, he said. I need you to go to bed, Caden said. I need you to rise in the morning and behave exactly as Silas expects. I need you to give him no reason to change his plan before I'm ready. Aldrich nodded, and after, he said, when this is over, he looked at him. There will be an inquiry, he said. You cooperated with an arrangement that endangered a member of your household, even without full knowledge, even manipulated. You chose not to ask a question that might have changed the outcome. He paused. That's not nothing. It will be treated as what it is. Aldrich nodded again. The nod of a man accepting what he'd earned, Ironfield, he said. Will it? If you cooperate fully. If you don't warn Silas. If you do exactly what I've asked. Caden stood. Ironfield still be standing when this is over. He moved to the door. Caden, Aldrich said. He turned. She's a better person than this house deserved, Aldrich said. She always was. Caden looked at him for a moment. I know, he said, and left. Back in the library at 3 in the morning. Wren was asleep in the chair, which she clearly hadn't intended to do. The second candle she'd lit an hour ago had burned halfway down. Her head was slightly to one side. The book had fallen closed in her lap. He considered waking her, decided against it. He sat at the table, read through the documents one more time, made 2 notes on the back of a blank piece of paper, the kind of notes that were for thinking, not for record, the kind you burned afterward. He looked at her, asleep, fully dressed, boots still on, because she'd expected to be awake. Braids slightly unraveled on the side she'd leaned against, one hand still resting on the book. She looked different asleep, not younger exactly, less managed. The practiced stillness gone because she wasn't awake to maintain it. What was left was just a person, tired. Actual, he thought about everything she'd done in the past 3 days, not what had been done to her. Not what had been planned around her, without her knowledge, by men who thought she was a variable to be managed, what she'd done. Noticed the wrong seal on his first day and stored it. Found the trading notation in Silas's fallen paper and carried it alone for 2 days. Read enough books in this cold library to decode a Western coastal commercial cipher. Sat in this chair and listened to him tell her the ground beneath her was hollow. And asked immediately what she could do to help. "What I want to know," she'd said, "is whether you can still fix it. Then that's what matters." He thought about the portrait on the table in the council chamber, the arranged hands, the composed expression, the woman he'd been about to agree to marry, based on a report and a painting. He looked at the woman in the chair. These were not the same person. The portrait was a surface. This was a structure, the difference between the appearance of composure and the actual thing underneath it, built not from ease, but from 12 years of necessity, of being overlooked, of carrying what couldn't be handed to anyone, of staying level when the ground moved. He thought about a lot of things, sitting at that table, until the second candle finally died at 4 in the morning, and the room went dark, and outside the north window, the drizzle turned to silence. And the last hour before dawn settled over Ironfield like it always did. Cold. Final. Waiting for whatever came next, she woke at 5, sat up. Book. Still in her lap. Looked at him across the dark table with the particular clarity of someone whose first moments of consciousness were accurate. "It's almost morning," she said. "Yes, did you sleep?" "No." She looked at him. Looked at the dead candle. Looked at the faint gray beginning in the north window. "My uncle," she said. "He'll do what he's been asked." She absorbed this, nodded, and Silas, she said. "He sent word out last night, yes, which means whoever he sent it to know something has moved, yes. So this morning, he'll try to move the timeline," Kaiden said. "Before the formal signing. He'll find a reason to get you out of the manor, somewhere he controls, somewhere my people can't follow, without a fight he doesn't want." She was quiet. "What will the reason be?" she said. "Something domestic. Something that sounds like preparation, a fitting for a dress, a visit to a seamstress in the village. Something that explains why you'd leave Ironfield in a carriage with him and not raise a flag." She thought about this. "And I need to appear to agree," she said, "until you don't," he said. She looked at him. "When do I not agree?" she said. "When I tell you." A pause. "How will I know?" she said. "I'll be at the front door," he said. She held his gaze, long enough to decide. "All right," she said. She stood, smoothed her dress, straightened her braid with the quick efficiency of someone resetting to operating condition, picked up the fallen book, set it back on the shelf. Then she turned to him. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. She reached into the back of the nearest reference book on the shelf, thicker than the others, and removed a small folded piece of paper. Her notebook pages. "From the first night," she said, "I wrote down everything I noticed about you." She held it out. He took it, unfolded it. Her small, neat, dense, the list she'd described, the wrong seal, the eyes that didn't lower, the way he'd looked at the gate, every observation she'd made in the first 24 hours. Catalogued with the precision of someone who had nothing to protect herself with except the accuracy of her own attention. At the bottom, a single line: does not walk like a servant, does not stand like one either. Waits like a man who is used to waiting for something worth waiting for. He looked up. She was watching him. I wrote that on the first night, she said. Before I knew anything else about you. He looked back at the paper, dotted it, folded it, held it. Why are you showing me this now? He said. She looked at him straight. Because today is going to be difficult, she said. And I wanted you to know that I made my decision about you before any of this. Not because of what you did. Not because you helped me. She paused. Because of how you stood in a courtyard in borrowed clothes and waited. And because you moved a stack of wood to the sheltered side without being asked. She moved to the back door, put her hand on the latch. I'll be at breakfast in an hour, she said. I'll act exactly as expected. She looked at him over her shoulder. And I'll trust you to be at the front door when it matters. The door opened. She went through it. The latch clicked shut. And in the cold library, with the paper still in his hand, and the gray morning pressing against the north window, Caden stood alone and felt the full weight of what she'd just handed him. Not just the paper, the trust behind it, which was, in his experience, the harder thing to carry. He was at the front door at 7 in the morning, Riddity, because that was the one thing he was absolutely certain he would be. 7 in the morning, Caden was at the front door. He'd been there since 6:45, standing near the entrance hall. Not in the doorway, not visible from the main corridor, just present. The way a man is present when he has decided that a particular thing is not going to happen and is prepared to make that decision physical if necessary. The house was awake, loudly, frantically, specifically awake in the way of a household that had been told its most important guest of the decade was arriving and had responded making every possible preparation simultaneously. The steward was counting linens again. Someone was polishing silver in the dining room. The smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Hilda's voice somewhere in the back, low and steady, organizing chaos the way she'd probably been organizing chaos for 40 years. Calla and Drea were on the stairs, dressed, hair arranged, speaking in the bright, performative voices they used when there was an audience worth performing for. Lord Aldrich was in his study with the door closed. He'd been there since dawn. Caden had heard him go in. Had heard the door click shut. Had not heard it open. Which meant Aldrich was doing what he'd been asked, sitting still, carrying the weight of what he'd helped build without knowing he was building it, and doing the one useful thing left to him. Nothing. Silas came down the main staircase at 7:15, dressed well, composed, moving with the smooth, unhurried efficiency of a man who had a plan and trusted it. His pale eyes moved across the entrance hall in their quiet, cataloging way. Registered Caden near the door, registered him as the correspondence waiter, filed him accordingly. Still. Good. He crossed toward the dining room, where Wren was already at the breakfast table, with Calla, Andrea, and 2 members of Gideon's advance party, playing their roles with the same discipline they'd been using for 3 days. Unhurried, pleasant, official without being formal. Caden watched from the corridor. Wren was extraordinary. That was the plain truth of it. Not extraordinary in the way the portrait had suggested. Extraordinary in a different and more difficult way. She sat at that table and ate her bread and answered questions, and smiled at exactly the right moments. Her hands were still. Her spine was straight. Her eyes were clear. And everything, underneath all of that, was something she had decided, in a cold library at 3 in the morning, to hold in place for exactly as long as necessary. She looked, to anyone watching, like a young woman who was slightly nervous about an important day, which was exactly right, because she was supposed to look like a young woman who was slightly nervous about an important day. Silas sat down across from her, poured himself tea, said something pleasant about the weather. She responded pleasantly about the weather, And Caden watched Silas's eyes, not the words, not the pleasantness, the eyes. They were moving quickly, over the advance spa party members, over Gideon, who was eating without appearing to pay attention to anything, over Ren, over the door counting. Again, something had shifted in him overnight. The note he'd sent out, the awareness that things were moving differently than planned. He hadn't changed his face about it, but his eyes were doing the work his face was refusing to do. He was recalculating. And a recalculating Silas, who was possibly actually Vex, and had been running this operation for 4 months, with the careful patience of a man accustomed to managing details, was going to make a move before the formal signing. Caden was certain of it. The question was when, and what shape it took. The answer came at 8:45. Silas set down his teacup, looked at Ren, with a smile that was exactly as warm as all his other smiles. Practiced to precisely the right temperature. I thought we might take a quick ride to the village before the afternoon ceremony, he said. There's a seamstress there who's been expecting you for the formal dress. A final fitting. Ren looked up and her face was perfect. Slight surprise. The appropriate small pleasure of a young woman being thought of. A brief glance at the window, considering, that sounds lovely, she said. How long would we be gone? 2 hours at most. We'd be back well before noon. She set her napkin on the table. Started to rise. Calla said something bright about the seamstress. Drea laughed. The 2 advance party members continued eating, without appearing to notice anything. Silas stood, moved toward the door, with the light efficiency of a man quite used to things going according to plan. Took 3 steps. Stopped because Kaiden was in the doorway, not blocking it exactly. Just present. In the way a man is present when he has decided something. Silas looked at him. The corridor was very quiet. Just the 2 of them. The breakfast room, behind the entrance hall ahead. The morning light coming through the front window, making everything very clear and very still. Something happened in Silas's face, not much, a very small shift. The particular quality of someone who is recalculating very quickly, and has done this before, and knows the specific texture of a situation that has gone wrong. I need to check the correspondence before anyone leaves the property, Kate. Lord Gideon's orders, flat. Even. Official. Silas looked at him. Of course, he said, still warm, still smooth. I can wait. It may take some time, Caden said. I understand. Completely. He understood completely. Caden watched him understand completely, and then breakfast room doorway. Gideon appeared, unhurried. The bearing of a man who had nowhere particular to be. Hands clasped behind his back. 2 of his people stepping into the entrance hall from the side corridor. The way people step into rooms when they've been waiting to step into rooms. Silas stood in the middle of all of it, and did not move, because he was a smart man. And a smart man, when the geometry of a room changes completely in 4 seconds, does not make sudden movements. Perhaps, Gideon said pleasantly, you'd like to wait in the south sitting room. It was not a question. Silas looked at Gideon, looked at Caden, looked at the 2 men in the entrance hall. Then he smiled, the same smile, precisely the same. Of course, he said, walked calmly in the direction indicated. Hilda was waiting in the kitchen corridor. Caden almost walked past her. She was standing close to the wall, still as furniture, holding something small in both hands, like she'd been holding it for a while, and had decided she was done waiting. She stepped forward. I've been trying to decide who to give this to for 3 weeks, she said. She held out a folded envelope, old, slightly soft at the edges from being handled. The wax seal, long since broken. He took it. I didn't trust Lord Aldrich, she said, and I didn't know the advance party people, and I didn't know you. She paused. But I watched you move that woodpile on your first morning here. He looked at her. The east side was always the wrong side, she said. Anyone who'd been here more than a day could see the weather came from the west, but Lord Aldrich never changed it. Silas never changed it. She looked at the envelope. You changed it your first afternoon, without being asked. Without anyone knowing you'd done it. She looked up. Person who notices something that small, she said, and fixes it anyway. That person pays attention to more than just what's convenient. He unfolded the letter. Read it. One page, written in a cramped hand, from a woman named Perrin, who had worked in the Ironfield kitchen for 11 years before being let go 6 weeks ago without explanation. Who had seen Silas at the North Gate at midnight on a Tuesday 3 months back, receiving a sealed crate from a man whose jacket carried a symbol she'd seen once before on a shipping manifest from the western port. Who had written down the symbol carefully at the bottom of the letter, the mark of the Vex family line, and at the bottom, below the symbol, in a different hand, smaller, like a second thought. I was not the only one let go that month. Ask Aldrich who else left Ironfield in the 6 months after Silas arrived. Ask him why. Caden looked up. Hilda was watching him. How long have you had this? He said. Since she left, Hilda said. She gave it to me the morning of her last day. Said if anyone ever came asking the right kind of questions, to pass it on. She paused. Nobody came asking for 3 weeks. Then you arrived. Why wait until now? Because I needed to be sure, she said simply. People who show up asking questions can be working for either of those questions. He held her gaze. And you're sure now, he said. You were at the front door at 6:45, she said. You didn't go to breakfast. You didn't move. You just waited. She folded her hands. That's not a man who's here for himself. Found Gideon in the south corridor. 20 minutes later, gave him the letter. Watched Gideon read it. Watched Gideon's face do the thing it did when something confirmed what he'd been calculating for hours. Not satisfaction. The opposite of satisfaction. The specific expression of a man who'd wanted to be wrong and wasn't. Perrin, Gideon said. I can find her. Do it, and the other staff who left, all of them. Names. Dates. Reasons given. Caden paused. Cross-reference with any property transfers registered in the Western Territory in the last year. Anything touching a V.7 notation? Gideon nodded. This connects to more than Ironfield. Yes. How much more? Caden looked at him. That's what we're going to find out, he said. Aldrich came out of his study at 10. He looked like a man who had aged carefully and significantly in the space of a single night. Not broken, just reduced. Like the last of something had finally been set down, and he was discovering what he looked like without it. He walked into the entrance hall and stopped, looked at Caden. It's done, he said. Silas is contained, Caden said. He'll be taken north today. Aldrich nodded. Looked at his hands. Will he say who sent him originally? Before the Ironfield connection. Who directed him here? He'll have incentive to cooperate, Caden said. Eventually, Aldrich was quiet for a moment. I'll tell you everything I know, he said. Every conversation. Every document I signed. Every name I heard and didn't ask about. He looked up. All of it I know you will. Caden said. A pause. The inquiry, Aldrich said. Yes. When, after I return north, within a fortnight. A formal investigator will come, Crown appointed. You'll have representation. Caden looked at him steadily. You cooperated. You didn't warn him. That carries weight, but it doesn't erase the rest. No, Caden said. It doesn't. Aldrich looked at the floor. Then looked up. She's in the library, he said quietly. She went up after breakfast. She looked. He stopped. She looked like herself, which I realize I haven't said in a long time. I realize I haven't looked at her directly in a long time. Caden said nothing. I don't expect her to forgive me, Aldrich said. I'm not asking for that, I know, Caden said. But I'd like her to know. He stopped again. I'd like her to know that I know what she is, and that whatever I fail to do, it wasn't because I didn't. He stopped, because some things don't have a clean ending. Because some sentences end in the middle. Because the person saying them finally has the honesty to know they don't deserve a clean ending. Caden looked at him. Tell her yourself, he said. He climbed the east stair. The one Silas hadn't used. The one she'd shown him on the second night. Mentioned quietly. practically, like a woman who had mapped every exit in a house she hadn't entirely trusted. Knocked once. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. She was at the window, standing this time, not the chair, both hands at her sides, looking out at the pine trees, which in the mid-morning light had lost the darkness they wore at dawn and become simply trees. Gray-green. Still, the frost gone, the drizzle gone. A thin, pale sky above the manor grounds. She turned when she heard him, looked at him. And he saw it happen in her face, the thing she'd been holding in place since 5 in the morning. Since the cold library. Since she'd taken her hands off it, long enough to sleep in a chair and picked it up again before she was fully awake. The held stillness, releasing, not collapsing. She didn't collapse. She wasn't the collapsing kind, and he'd known that from the second morning in the kitchen, with the wrong seal and the bowl of porridge. Just releasing, like a fist opening. "He's contained?" she said. "Yes. He'll be taken north within the hour," she nodded, "and my uncle cooperating fully. There will be an inquiry." "I know," she looked at the window. "He came to my door this morning. Before breakfast, he knocked and stood there and said—" She paused. "He said he was sorry. Just that. He didn't try to explain it. Is that enough?" Caden said. She thought about it. Actually thought about it. "No," she said, "not yet." A pause, but it's where you start. With the actual words, without the justification after them. She looked at him. Most people can't manage even that. He crossed the room, sat down at the library table, because that was where conversations in this room happened. Not standing. Level. The way he'd done it the first time, and the way it had mattered more than he'd expected. She turned from the window, sat in the chair. The same position, and nothing between them for once. No cover story, no investigation, no documentation spread across the table. No reason to be in this room, except the two of them, and whatever came next. He looked at her. "There's something I need to ask you," he said. She waited. "The contract," he said. "The real one. The formal arrangement that was proposed between Ironfield and the Northern Territories." She held his gaze. "I want to discuss it with you," he said. "Not through intermediaries. Not through signed documents sent through the post. Not through a portrait on a table that told me nothing about who you actually are." He paused. "With you. Directly. As two people who have spent 3 days being more honest with each other than either of us planned." The library was very quiet. The pale morning light in the north window. The smell of old books and dust, and the faint cold of stone walls. Wren looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not the smile, not yet, not quite. Something underneath the smile. Warmer than composure and more careful than happiness. "I need to say something first," she said. He waited. "If I agree," she said, "I agree because I choose to. Not because this house has debts. Not because my uncle needs something from this. Not because you came here and discovered what was happening and did something about it." She looked at him directly. "I'm grateful for all of that. But gratitude is not a reason to marry someone. And I won't pretend it is just because it makes paperwork easier." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "And I need time," she said, "to know the difference between choosing and having no other choice. I've never had enough time to tell them apart. I'd like that to change." He looked at her. "How much time?" he said. She considered. "Come back in 3 weeks," she said. "Not in borrowed clothes. Not with a different name. As yourself. And we'll have an actual conversation without the investigation, without the emergency. Without me in a house that's been trying to manage me, and you in a costume trying to stop it." A pause. "Just two people," she said. "Talking." He looked at her for a moment. Then he's 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she said. He stood, moved to the door, stopped, turned back. "The woodpile," he said. She looked at him. "I moved it on the first afternoon," he said. "Before I knew anything. Before the letters. Before Silas. Before any of it." He paused. "I moved it because the wind was coming from the west, and the east side was wrong, and it seemed like it had always been wrong, and nobody had noticed. She was quiet. "I know," she said. "That's all it was," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said again. And this time the thing underneath the composure was fully visible for exactly a moment. That's why it mattered. He left, down the east stair, through the kitchen corridor, past Hilda, who looked at him once and said nothing, and went back to her bread, out through the kitchen door, and into the pale morning. The frost was gone. The drizzle was gone. The pine trees at the edge of the grounds stood in the thin, clear light of a November morning, with all their darkness put away. He breathed, once, twice, then he went to find Gideon. Silas left in a closed carriage before noon. He walked to it, without being pulled, without resisting, without any outward sign that the man climbing into that carriage was anyone other than what he'd presented himself as. A secretary, a functionary, a man in the middle of a small administrative inconvenience, the same smile. All the way to the carriage door, which was either extraordinary nerve or the behavior of a man who had done this before, who had been in situations where everything went wrong and had learned that maintaining the surface was the only thing that left options open. He watched the carriage leave through the iron gate. The gate swung closed, clanged, and Ironfield Manor settled into the strange particular quiet of a place where something had been removed that had been hiding in it for a long time. Not peaceful yet, not clean. Those would take longer. Would take the inquiry and the restructuring and the slow work of Aldrich accounting for what he'd allowed without knowing he was allowing it. But quieter, the particular quiet of a house that had stopped holding its breath. Gideon found him near the stable at 1 o'clock, stood beside him. Looked at nothing. "The Western Properties," Gideon said. "I've sent the documentation to the Port Authority and the Magistrate's office. Official inspection within the fortnight." He paused. "There will be more found there than just a paper trail, I know," Caden said. "It's going to be a long investigation, I know." And Vex, Gideon stopped. "If that's who Silas is. He's been running this for years, longer than the Ironfield arrangement. There are going to be other cases." "Find them," Caden said. "All of them." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You stayed 3 days in a borrowed coat to look at one woman," he said. "Because you didn't trust a portrait." "Yes. You were right not to." Caden said nothing. "She's not what the proposal described," Gideon said. "Not a criticism, just a fact." "No," Caden said. "Better or worse?" Caden looked at the pine trees at the edge of the grounds. "Different category entirely," he said. Gideon made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. The sound of a man who had been right about something for a long time and had decided not to say so. 3 weeks, Caden said. I know, Gideon said. "I'll manage the council." "Thank you. Don't thank me." Gideon looked at him. "Just don't wear the patched coat when you come back. It's an embarrassment to the Northern Territories." Calla and Drea left 2 days later. No ceremony. No dramatic departure. Just 2 women who had decided, with the efficient practicality of people who had always treated Ironfield as temporary, that the ratio of convenience to comfort had shifted enough to require a change of location. Calla embraced Lord Aldrich at the front door. Drea waved at Hilda from the carriage window. Neither of them said goodbye to Wren, which was, somehow, more telling than anything they'd said in the past 3 days. Wren stood at the upstairs window and watched the carriage go. Then she went back to the library and picked up a book she'd actually been meaning to read for 6 years. Something quiet and very long. The kind of book you read when you finally have time. When the house is finally still enough to hear your own thoughts. She read for 2 hours without interruptions, which was new and very good. The weeks moved. Aldrich cooperated with everything, fully, without reservation, without the particular lawyerly caution of a man trying to minimize damage, just complete accounting. The most honest he'd been in a decade, which was a strange thing to discover about yourself. That crisis had done what character hadn't, that having everything visible at last was almost a relief. Ironfield was placed under Crown oversight, the debts restructured, not forgiven. Because forgiveness without consequences wasn't really forgiveness. It was just accounting that felt kind. But Ironfield would survive, and Aldrich would manage it, carefully, with much less margin for error than before. Which was, perhaps, the better condition for a man who had consistently failed to account for errors. Hilda stayed. Hilda always stayed. The new kitchen staff came in quietly. Younger. Two girls who were efficient and cheerful and genuinely fond of bread making. The manor learned a different rhythm. Wren read 11 books in 3 weeks. Rearranged the library. Found a complete edition behind a shelf that had been there since before she was born. Discovered that the 3 ceramic jars she'd never understood the purpose of were for soaking dried herbs, and started using them. Small things, her own things. The particular quiet pleasure of moving through a house without waiting to be told where to stand. He came back on a Thursday morning. Before the frost had fully lifted, the carriage arrived through the iron gate with the northern seal on the door, and the great foreigner at the pole, and 2 outriders who were clearly not trying to look inconspicuous. No patched coat, no borrowed name. The steward opened the front door, stood there with the expression of a man trying to decide which version of shocked to be. Caden dismounted, looked at the manor, gray towers, iron gate. The cracked mortar he'd noticed on the first morning. The pine trees along the north wall, darker now in the deeper cold of late season. Same place, different reasons for being in it. He walked to the front door, through the entrance hall, up the main stair this time. Not the east stair, the main one. Because he wasn't hiding, and didn't need the servant's route, and wasn't carrying a false name, or a borrowed coat, or any of the careful invisibility he'd needed 3 weeks ago. He was himself, which was, he had discovered over 12 years of ruling a kingdom, the most difficult thing to consistently be. The library door was closed. He knocked once. "Come in," she said. He opened it. She was at the table, book open in front of her, actually reading it this time. She looked up, and for a moment she did the very brief recalibration that people do when they see a version of someone they know in a context that's different from where they've known them. He was in formal riding gear, dark, northern cut. The silver ring on his right hand that he'd left behind 3 weeks ago, back on his finger where it belonged. She looked at him for a moment. "You look strange without the patched coat," she said. He stood in the doorway. "I left it behind," he said. "I know. Gideon sent a note." "He did," he said. "And I'm quoting directly here. The coat has been retired. The kingdom is grateful, something he hadn't done in a while, almost. Not quite a smile, deeper than that." He walked into the room, sat down at the table, across from her. The same chair, same position, level. She closed the book, set it aside, and looked at him. "3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. "You came back. I said I would." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I was testing whether you'd state it plainly or try to make it sound like more than it was." He looked at her. "And you stated it plainly," she said. "Good." A pause. Outside the window, the pale, cold sky, the pine trees, the empty rope line in the courtyard below. "So," she said, "2 people, no investigation, no emergency. No borrowed clothes, an actual conversation." "Yes." She folded her hands on the table. Not in the performed way of the portrait. Just resting. The hands of someone who wasn't managing what they looked like. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something you wouldn't have told Ash's version of yourself on the first day." He thought about it. Actually thought about it. Then, "I turned the portrait face down before I left the council chamber," he said. "Before I'd made any decision about coming here. Before I knew anything was wrong." She waited. "I turned it down because no one in that room had said your name like you were a person," he said. "Just like you were a term in an agreement. And I didn't." He paused. "I didn't want to look at you that way." Even in a painting, the library was quiet. She looked at him. "That's a good true thing," she said. "Your turn," he said. She was quiet for a moment. When you came into the kitchen on the second morning, she said, and told me you weren't from Lord Brennan's household. I already knew that. I'd known for a full day. She paused. But when you said it directly, without trying to keep the story going, I thought. She stopped. What? He said. I thought, this person is going to tell me the truth when it costs him something. She looked at the table. That's rarer than it should be. He held her gaze. It is, he said. She looked at him. I've been thinking about what you asked. She said, the contract. The actual one. And she was quiet for a moment, considering the way she considered everything, with full attention, with patience, with the willingness to let something be as complicated as it was before deciding what to do about it. I don't know you, she said. Not really. 3 days of a crisis is not the same as knowing someone. No, he said. It's not, but I know some things, she said. I know how you stood in a courtyard in someone else's clothes and watched and waited and moved a woodpile to the sheltered side without being asked. I know you sat down in this room instead of standing. I know you told me the truth about my uncle without making it soft. She looked at him. I know you made a mistake on the second night, she said, and didn't excuse it. He said nothing. And I know you sat on the front step in the cold afterward, she said, instead of going inside. Because you'd said you'd be at the door and being wrong earlier didn't change what you'd committed to. A pause. Hilda told you that, he said. Hilda tells me everything. She looked at him. She's been on my side for 23 this years. I've learned to return the favor. He looked at her. This woman in a cold library in a manor at the edge of the northern pines. In worn boots she'd replaced last week with slightly better ones. Hair, braided neatly and practically with no performance in it. A book closed beside her that she'd actually been reading, taking up exactly the space she was owed. Finally, quietly, without making a production of it, so she said, I'm willing to know you better, if you're willing to be known accurately. Which is different from being known favorably. I know the difference, he said. Good, she said. Then yes. We can discuss contract. He looked at her. Not today, she said. Today we're just two people in a library. We can discuss the contract next time. Next time, he said. Yes. She opened her book again, then looked up. There's fresh bread in the kitchen. Hilda made it this morning. She'll be offended if the king doesn't try it. He stood. I suspect Hilda is difficult to offend, he said. You'd be surprised, she said. She has very strong feelings about bread. He moved to the door, stopped, turned back. The woodpile, he said. I checked on my way in. Someone stacked the east side lower again. She looked at him over her book. The wind shifted back, she said. 3 days ago, west again. He looked at her. You changed it, he said. Someone had to, she said. You weren't here. The months that followed moved in the way that things move when they're being built rather than managed, slowly, with care, with the occasional argument that was real rather than performed, with disagreements that were about something and therefore resolvable, with the particular quality of trust that only develops when two people have already seen what the other looks like under actual pressure and decided they can work with it. The inquiry completed in early spring. Aldrich gave full testimony. The investigation into the Western properties found what Gideon had expected and worse. The proceedings lasted the better part of a year. What was uncovered and what was done about it was not a simple story and not a fast one, but it was done, thoroughly. Because Kaiden had made a promise in a cold library to a woman who had been carrying fear alone for 2 days. And promises made to people who are carrying things alone deserve to be kept completely. The wedding was at the end of summer. Wren had asked for small. She got small. The great hall of the northern capital was set for 200 instead of 2,000, and the senior council members complained about protocol, and Gideon told them, with the unhurried authority of a man who had made peace with everything, to manage their expectations. Wren chose the dress herself, blue-gray, the color of the sky above Ironfield on a clear winter morning. Not the blue of formal portraits. Not the blue of someone's idea of what a queen should wear. The actual color of a specific sky at a specific time in a place that was hers. She'd brought Hilda to the capital a month before the wedding. Hilda had opinions about the palace kitchens, loudly. The palace kitchen staff had opinions about Hilda's opinions. It was, Kaiden reflected, the most efficiently resolved conflict his administration had managed in 3 years, because Hilda's method of conflict resolution was to simply outlast every objection until the other party agreed that bread made her way was better, which it was, and everyone could move on the evening of the wedding. Long summer light, the smell of warm stone and pine from the gardens beyond the hall, the celebration inside continuing at its own pace. The pace of people who understood that not every good thing needed to be witnessed. They walked in the gardens, side by side. No particular destination, the way you walk. You're not going anywhere specific, and that's the point. She said, I knew you weren't who you said you were from the moment you looked at the gate. He looked at her. You've said that before, he said. I know. I like saying it. Why? She considered. Because you came all that way in a borrowed coat to see if I was worth knowing, she said. And I figured it out before you'd finished tying up your horse. She glanced at him. I think it matters. That I saw you seeing. Before you knew I was looking, he was quiet for a moment. And what did you see? He said. She looked out at the gardens, the last of the summer light warm on everything. A man who was trying very hard to be invisible, she said, and couldn't quite manage it. Because he kept doing things that visible people do. She paused, like moving wood piles. He looked at her. It was practical, he said. I know, she said. That's why it worked. She stopped walking, turned to face him, in the long evening light, in the garden of the northern capital. With the celebration continuing gently inside, and the pine trees dark against the warm sky and the smell of the season, turning slowly toward something cooler. I have a question, she said. Yes, when you sat on the front step, in the cold after the mistake. When you'd been awake all night and the operation was moving faster than you'd planned, and you'd had Gideon's face of confirmation across a porridge bowl. He looked at her. What were you thinking about, she said, sitting there. Not about the investigation, not about Silas. What were you actually thinking about? He was quiet for a moment, an honest moment. The kind that took a second because it was real. You, he said. In the kitchen, the second morning. When you said tell who, 2 words. Like the question had been sitting in you for a long time and you'd finally said it out loud. She looked at him. I thought about that for a long time, he said. On the step, in the cold. The size of what those 2 words were carrying. She was quiet, then, and I thought that if I was going to be someone worth telling things to, he said, I needed to be at the door in the morning. Regardless of what had gone wrong the night before, she looked at moment, the kind of moment that doesn't need anything added to it. Then she said, good answer, and turned back toward the gardens. And they kept walking. The summer light held for another hour, which was exactly enough. And Wren, who had spent 23 years learning to take up as little space as possible, had finally quietly taken up all of hers, not because someone gave it to her, because she'd been holding it the whole time, and had simply, finally, stopped giving it back.